Hello everyone, and welcome back to my support specific series, where I talk about the 1%ers that separate the good from the great. Today we're going to be talking about concepts, and there are three main concepts that I want to cover today. First one is how to conceptualize the role of support, as most people get this wrong. There's a lot of misconceptions here. The second is the concept of the identity shift at 8 minutes. And the last point is going to be about the concept of the middle of the map scaling with time. So without further ado, let's get into this video. Supports are often seen as bot laners, tied to the bot lane, standing in lane, collecting lane EXP, collecting gold as much as possible. But I've said it before and I'll say it again, support can oftentimes be seen as a secondary jungler. In the current meta, you need to prioritize early pressure over scaling. This is just what your role needs to be. You need to think of yourself as a pressuring role rather than a scaling role. This is especially important for the support classes of engagers and playmakers. A lot of what they do and a lot of their strengths is tied around creating win conditions for your team, generating pressure, creating number advantages, roaming. Although it is still worth considering on mages and even enchanters to adopt this early pressuring mindset. So, early pressure is applied through several factors. Your item choices, your runes, your decisions. But what I'm looking to encourage here is to change your entire outlook, so that if you adopt a pressuring outlook, a pressuring mindset, then everything will manifest itself as high pressure, just naturally. So, with that being said, I'm going to talk about all of those points. I'm going to talk about items, how to pressurize with items, how to pressurize with runes, and how to pressurize with your decisions. Let's start with item choices. So in my last video, I talked about the Spell Thieves versus the Relic line, how the Relic line provides more pressure early in terms of invaluable wave control and flat HP. However, I want to briefly dive into the differences between the Relic Shield and the Steel Shoulder Guards. Typically, okay, so the Relic Shield provides AP, right, and the Steel Shoulder Guards provides AD. So, how the game works is typically AD provides more early pressure than AP. This is why you'll see Thresh go Shoulder Guards, even though he has an AP ratio on his Q, his E, and his R, so that he can auto-attack constantly in lane and look for poke and look for shove. And having a lot of uptime with flat AD provides more pressure than having some AP on his other abilities, which is more about scaling. It's all about that poke and that priority. You'll also see some Leonas, most Leonas actually, go Shoulder Guards, even though Leona has 4 AP ratios. And now you really have to ask yourself why, and you really want to understand why Leona prioritizes AD over 4 AP ratios. This is once again because AD is more pressuring. Her trading pattern also involves a lot of auto attacks, and so she can auto attack minions. Her all-in the laning phase with auto attacking 3 times, auto Q, auto, is going to do more damage with the AD. And come mid to late game, the AD is going to be absolutely irrelevant, and AP would have provided her with a little bit more burst in the mid to late, but we're prioritizing early game, and it's important to adopt that mentality. It's the same with Blitz. Even though AP scales better on Blitz, he has a AP ratio on his Q, on his R. He also goes Steel Shoulder Guards. So if these champions did go Relic Shields, they would have more utility or do more damage in the mid to late, but once again, we're focusing on pressuring in the early game. So just to clarify, I'm not saying that building these AD items are going to insanely carry your laning phases. I just want to point out that taking AD is buying into the early pressure versus the scaling condition, and this is what a lot of supports already do and what they need to do more. The biggest factor that actually changes when I encourage this pressuring mindset is the runes. You want early pressure from your runes too. In the inspiration tree, Dematerializer, one of the most pressuring in lane when you have a Relic Shield line item. You can get shove, you can use that roam to base or to fix a wave state. You instantly one-shot a cannon minion. That's a lot of tempo for you to pressure the map. Hex Flash is also great in the early game. It's great for trading flashes, which is always useful if you're trading flashes with the enemy ADC, and then you can have Hex Flash to threaten while they don't have flash. You can also look to all-in bot Hex Flashing from bushes over walls in the laning phase. You can also Hex Flash around the terrain by mid lane in the early game and laning phase. It's also very useful there. So Hex Flash is another great pressuring rune. Time Warp Tonic, one of the most flavor of the month runes. It provides a burst of healing, which is great in laning phase. Any flat values in laning phase when there's not much gold or items to back them up, they're very valuable. And there's a bonus synergy with Time Warp Tonic where it synergizes with Biscuits. So if you take Biscuits and Time Warp Tonic, you can get that burst of healing with some move speed as well, all together pretty strong in the laning phase. What I want you guys to think about is to avoid scaling runes, like Overgrowth. That's absolutely useless as a support. You never want to just be sitting in a lane, constantly by minions, not pressuring the map. Magical Footwear only comes online around 10, 11, 12 minutes, and you really need that mobility to pressure the map. And Cosmic Insight, which it practically provides no use in the early game. It's all about having uptime and utility in the mid to late game. So try to avoid those runes, especially when you're playing engagers and playmakers. On the topic of runes still, you want to avoid the scaling CDR rune, and you want to avoid the scaling health rune, which also obviously needs to scale into the late game and provides no value early on. So I'm going to talk about a few rune setups now that you should consider. If you're planning to go the glacial route for your engager or playmaker, you want to take glacial and then either Hex Slash or Stopwatch. Stopwatch is also great in the early game. You get one use of it to really turn the fight around and doesn't scale at all. Futures Market is good to rush Moby Boots, especially so that you can get out on the map and pressure really hard. Otherwise, Minion Dematerializer. I don't encourage Biscuits with Time Warp Tonic too much. The Futures Market and Dematerializer provides too much value in the early game. But then, lastly, you should wrap it up with Time Warp Tonic. And then in the secondary Resolve tree, you want to go Unflinching and either Second Wind or Bone Plating, depending on the matchup, depending on your champ. But once again, we're avoiding the Overgrowth, and we're going to be avoiding Conditioning on Engagers and Playmakers as well. And then you go the Adaptive Defense runes as appropriate for your situation. Oftentimes I'll take Double Armor, unless I feel like I really need Magic Resist, because armor is stronger early as well to deal with auto attacks, minions, towers. But if there's a couple AP threats, I'll go an AP rune as well. And if you want to take the Aftershock rune, you would go Aftershock, Font of Life, Bone Plating, and then Unflinching almost invariably. And then for the secondary tree, Inspiration, you're choosing between Time Warp Tonic, Dematerializer, and Hex Slash for the most part. That'll provide you the most pressure from your rune setup. The last point I'm going to talk about for the pressuring identity of support is decisions. Now, one of the most common mistakes from my students is pathing bot from base, just autopiloting, walking straight bot, where the only thing that they're going to achieve by being bot is just soaking some EXP, maybe getting a bit of gold on your support item, but absolutely nothing else. Maximizing EXP on your champion in exchange for pressuring the map, such as helping mid, helping jungle, controlling vision, pressuring objectives, roaming, being a fog warrior, it's never going to be the best decision. And this is for two main reasons. Firstly, for playmakers and engagers especially, once you're level 3 and you have all your abilities unlocked, you're practically full build, okay? You have access to all of your abilities, you have a lot of utility and roaming power already, and this is your time to shine. You haven't been outscaled, and you need to generate pressure and win cons for your team. So your win condition is pressuring early and creating win conditions for your team so that they can carry you in the mid to late. It's never going to be about scaling up and trying to be some kind of carry in the mid to late game yourself. You just don't have access to resources for that. Secondly, pressuring towards mid, you will get EXP through that lane as well. So even if you're not pathing bot from base, the wave crashes bot, you decide that there's no pressure in you being bot, you pressure towards mid instead, you're leaning towards mid in fog, let's say you're in the mid bush, you're still getting access to EXP from that mid bush area. So you're not just completely falling off. A good rule of thumb to ask yourself is, am I achieving anything by being here? Whether it is being bot or whether it is being mid, are you achieving anything? Are you pressuring the map? Is your presence being there exerting pressure in some dimension? Maybe you're allowing someone to fix a bad wave state. Maybe you're counter ganking. Maybe you're generating priority. If the answer is nothing, change something, okay? This is a question that I ask my students as well. You need to be allergic to be doing nothing. Anything is better than nothing. When you autopilot bot, you're practically doing nothing, and you can always be exerting pressure elsewhere on the map. And then a common response is, but what if my mid laner is in base or my jungler is on top side? You still can exert pressure around the middle of the map, even if your mid laner is in mid. You can play the vision control game. You can sweep out their wards, you can get some wards as deep as you feel is safe at that current time. And it is better than being AFK under your bot tower. But for every situation, let's say your mid laner is pressuring really hard in mid, then you can lean towards him so that he can continue to push hard. Or you can even get deeper vision, look for counter jungling, you can counter gank. If the mid lane is more equated, you can just look to straight up gank it. If your mid laner is struggling, you can help him collect a wave and reset. If your mid laner is not in lane, you can control vision around mid. Anything is always better than nothing, okay? It's easy to say, just don't be bot, you're achieving nothing. But if you don't know what to do instead, how to actually exert pressure instead of doing nothing bot, I recommend that you check out my support fundamentals roaming video. The link to that is going to be in the description below. But yeah, neutral objectives, Dragon Soul win cons, Herald early, Baron, Dragon Soul late game. These are just too broken to justify scaling. So even if one team outscales, all the neutrals match and even overcome that scaling deficit in many cases. So this is why you really want to prioritize early pressure so you can start snowballing and generate win conditions for your team. Okay, so with all of that being said, I want you to look for opportunities to pressure early. I want you to just take a step back, away from the specifics I've been talking about items, about runes, and try to adopt a holistic pressuring mindset where you look for any excuse, any opportunity to generate pressure. Maybe you can even share with me some ways that you're able to exert pressure outside of items, runes, and these decisions about not being bot for no reason. So now that we've covered support identity and pressuring early, I now want to talk about the identity shift that happens at 8 minutes. What's so important about 8 minutes, and why do we have to shift our identity at that time? So in the past, I've advocated frequently for prioritizing wave states. This is even one of my 4 support fundamentals, and it's the number 1 fundamental at that. This is a really useful concept to learn and understand, and it's amazing in the early lane. However, at 8 minutes and onwards, the cost of prioritizing bot wave state may be too large to justify, and this is for one main reason in the Rift Herald. This neutral is just straight up broken. In the early lane, pre-8 minutes, you can maintain a freeze and get ahead in the 2v2 with no real answer possible by the enemy team. There are no neutrals on the map, especially there's no Herald on the map in the early game. And junglers are tied into their first or second clears, typically. So they want to be doing camps, putting their camps on cooldown, and they're not able to just instantly come out and pressure your lane. However, if at 8 minutes you try to hold a freeze bot, the enemy team can respond to your lane showing both champs AD and support, and having no priority in your lane by playing for Herald. Sure, their ADC might drop a wave or two, maybe they can even stay in XP range, but this is not going to be an appropriate response. If they respond to your freeze, they get Herald, their sup roams, and then they pull off a dive on mid or top, they drop Herald, they get an entire tower, first tower gold, a kill. It's going to far outweigh what you're gaining in the bot side just by getting a few minion waves of EXP ahead of the enemy ADC. So yeah, the gold swing would be too astronomical. And a useful concept for you to have is that at 8 minutes, you flip a switch, okay? You flip a switch, and prioritizing bot wave state is lower on the priority list now. And you want to gravitate towards the middle of the map more. This means shoving out waves and roaming / basing instead of staying in lane to freeze. Pre 8 minutes, hold a freeze, it's a good wave state, great, very hard to get punished. Post 8 minutes, don't freeze. Rule of thumb, just don't freeze, shove. Get prio, roam, base, pressure the map, okay? So yeah, it also means pressuring from river fog versus side bush fog. So let's say that you don't necessarily want to shove out bot wave at 8 minutes plus. You want to pressure in riverside fog rather than in bot lane fog, because then you are able to respond to Herald. You are able to move and group up with your mid and jungler much easier than if you're just stuck in the side lane in a side bush. Let's say the enemy laners see that you're in lane bush. They see you enter one of the bushes there. Their jungler sees that. Maybe their support leans towards mid-side fog, or he just completely roams. They get Herald. You don't get enough in response. Not a good idea. This actually ties in perfectly into my next concept about the middle of the map scaling. The longer that the game goes on, the more important the middle of the map and mid lane becomes. This starts to become relevant at 8 minutes. And in the late laning phase, which is 8 to 14 minutes, you need to start thinking about this. And then it accelerates. 14 minutes plus, I see, is the transition between early game and the mid to late game, as towers fall much easier with the resistance loss. There's less gold in the towers. The map opens up. Lanes become longer, so there's more time to apply pressure before collecting minions. This is when the pressure of the map being centered around mid peaks. Okay? If you're ever in a side lane as a support post 14 minutes, you better have a damn good reason, because the other side of the map becomes so weak just by you showing in a side. Let's say you're top with your ADC and you're just collecting waves there, and the enemy support, he has a better understanding of the game. He's around mid. He can get mid prior and then either lean towards top to protect whatever you guys are planning, or move towards bot and look for a bot dive, and you guys can't answer that at all because you're top, or they can do anything. And the only thing you can do is pressure top, and that's just not going to cut it post 14 minutes. The only damn good reasons that you could have are ganks and dives. This is pretty much the only justification for being in a side lane in the mid to late. You can hover towards a side and fog in river to prevent a dive or to provide support to a carry, but never actually being in the side lane, never physically showing, never hitting the minion wave, never fogging in those side lane bushes. You can lean towards it to alleviate or exert pressure, and then you're once again gravitating towards the middle of the map. I just want to talk about why practically the middle of the map becomes more important. We can have a feel for it. We can tell ourselves we need to pressure towards mid, but the more that we understand the fundamentals and why this is actually important, the better and the more likely that you are to implement this. So, mid is so important because waves meet here first, right? When minions leave the base, they crash in mid lane much before the side lanes crash, because the side lane minions, they have to travel a further distance and they all travel at the same speed. So what you can do is that you can get prio in the mid lane and then transition it to the side lane, because you get pressure first. So let's say a team is set up on top side. The enemy team is setting up around top side, you set up around mid. You get mid prio, and then you can lean to top. And now you have mid pressure, and they can't even get top pressure because you're leaning there already, right? And you can also choose wherever you want to pressure. Obviously, mid lane is in the middle of the map, and you can move to either top or to bot or to pressure around mid. If you're in a side, you can literally only pressure the side and try to roam towards mid. But having that access to the whole map is a lot more pressuring. So with this in mind, before you achieve anything on the map, ward mid lane as deep as possible, okay? This is one of the easiest quick fixes that I give to my students, and it always works. Just ward mid lane. You're coming out of base, it's mid to late game, drop a ward mid, okay? Either get that mid wave of prio. If your team is around to shove the wave, shove the mid wave, get a really deep mid ward. If your team is all dead or on the side, doesn't matter. Run mid, ward mid as deep as safely possible at that moment, and then go and pressure the map however you see fit. This is a great rule of thumb. We all know League of Legends is fluid, so if there's like a massive team fight in a jungle, obviously you're not going to run straight past it to ward, but it's a really good habit to get into. Prioritize mid lane ward before doing anything else on the map. Pressure stems from mid first. You need to get pressure around mid. You need to try and get mid wave prio if you can, and then you need to ward mid to see how the enemy is going to respond to your mid pressure. if they're looking to contest, or if they get a wave of mid-prior, whichever side they lean, you have perfect information as to what they're trying to pressure. So yeah, just keep thinking about the middle of the map scaling as the game goes on. So if you follow all of these points that I'm talking about, you will probably have more success, but what I'm really striving for, once again, I want to get across the concept of support's identity and how to appropriately pressure the map. And I want you to think about the game, think about pressuring more. Become allergic to exerting zero pressure. Ask yourself, am I achieving anything, or am I just sitting here soaking up golden EXP? For the most points that I've discussed, the exception, if there is an exception, is going to be in Enchanters. Their role in the game is to actually scale up and minimize early losses. I'm not a fan of this identity in general, but if you do play Enchanters, the scaling runes such as Cosmic Insight, Transcendence, Mana Flow, Gathering Storm, these runes become more viable because they tie into their win condition of grouping up and having a lot of EXP. With that being said, if you are an Enchanter player, you can still use these concepts that I've talked about, and you can prevent the enemy support from out-pressuring and snowballing in the early game, so that you can still naturally outscale in the mid to late game. The danger is if you opt into a full scaling setup in terms of items, runes, champion. If you don't make it to the mid to late, you can't win, right? If you are too weak in the early and you just get snowballed on, you can't make it to your win condition. So you can even opt into some early pressuring decisions in terms of items, runes, roaming as an enchanter, just to shore up your early game weakness, prevent the enemy from out pressuring and snowballing on you, and then naturally outscale regardless. Thanks for watching, and I hope that the concepts of support identity, pressuring early, the identity shift at 8 minutes, and the middle of the map scaling is going to serve useful in your solo queue journey. As always, feel free to join my School of Support Discord server. The link is going to be down below for coaching, useful support resources, or chatting with like-minded support individuals like yourselves. Thanks again for watching. Bye.